Hello and welcome to another episode of Fundy Tidings. I'm your host Jay Reamer, and my guest today is Mack MacDonald. Welcome to the show, Mack.
Well, thank you, Jay.
Mack is an author who has written a book called The Only Way Out, which is a murder mystery based in Grand Manan Island, of all places. So it's a great pleasure for me to have you here. And I am also writing a book, and so we've got something in common there. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to ask you, what is it that drew you to write a book to begin with?
Well, I've always been an avid reader since my youth, and while I've never taken any formal writing courses per se, I did develop a skill in writing with the RCMP. And I was stationed in New Brunswick here way back in 1967 through 1980, and I was first stationed in St. George. And I would often relate to my father-in-law some of the stories that were happening, some of the incidents that I dealt with, and he always told me, you should write these things down. They're really interesting, and do that before you forget them. Well, I didn't for some time, but just before I retired, I wrote a small book for my kids, indicating all of the events that occurred in my time here in New Brunswick. But I kept it as a very local thing because there were true events and involving real people, and I really didn't want to publish that for that reason. But when I retired, I felt the need to write, to do something, and so a friend encouraged me to write a novel, and I thought that was kind of interesting, and so it provided me with an opportunity to write a fictional story with real events that had occurred with me over the years in a fictional format, and so I did. But ironically, I never really started to write it with the real intent of finishing it. It was simply something I enjoyed doing. I could sit down at my computer when I felt like it, and I would start the story, and when I was tired, I would just get up and leave it, and I often left it for days, weeks even. And finally, I came to the end, and I can't believe it's actually the size it is. I never would have started writing it if I'd known it was going to be this size. But I picked Grand Manan as the site of my story because I decided on a murder mystery, and an island in the fog is a pretty good venue for a mystery. So I wrote it, but a lot of the things that are in it were real. Mm-hmm. Some of the people were real, not from Grand Manan per se, but from other places. And for example, the way the body is found in real life, that actually happened, but it wasn't a murder in reality, but in my story it was. And some of the other events that occur in this situation were real, and so it provided me with a venue to sort of describe all these things in a fictional format.
So how much time did you spend on Grand Manan doing the research for this?
Well, I was there twice relieving the members there when I was stationed in St. George, and that's when I first looked at it as an interesting spot. But I was only there for about a week doing some research when Mary was there for nurses reunion. But I went around and I searched, redid the island geographically and come up with a few places. But I've also taken some literary license, as we say, for the purpose of the storyline, and I've taken a few liberties there. But for the most part, it's pretty real.
So I think storytelling is a great art, and so you must have been quite an exercise in building the plot and telling the story and having it sort of go from start to finish, and
yes,
all of the challenges that you would have had. Did you have any writer's block issues, or did you run into any snags, or did this just come flowing right out the pen?
For a while it kept flowing right out, but then I ran into a lot of snags, plot-wise, and for example, I got partway through the book and I realized there wasn't enough tension. I needed a little bit more suspense. And so I had to add a different character. So I had to go back a little bit, write the chapter to introduce that character, and then run the thread through to the other chapters so that he was still linked in. And there were many times I just sat there and said, I don't know where I'm going with this, and I would just get up and leave it. Because there wasn't any decision on my part that I had to get this done and get it printed and done as a. It was just the process was what I was enjoying. Actually, I was almost finished the book. I realized I was almost finished it, and I didn't know who did the murder. And I had to figure out, well, okay, which of my half dozen or more suspects is actually going to have done the dirty deed. So I sat down and I said, okay, it's this person. And then I made sure that the storyline fit that, and went in and completed it. And I'm pleased to say that some people have said, Mack, I never figured out who did it, until the end. We had me going all the way. So I had myself going too, because I didn't know who did it.
Was the experience of telling the story, did it reveal anything to you that you didn't know about yourself previously, or was it an experience that you'd like to do again? Or is there another book in the works?
There's a sequel to this one in the works. But see, I already enjoyed this because it was like a hobby, and when, like anything, when you have other things to do, you set it aside and then you pick it up again when the time permits. So it took me a number of years to actually write this. Now with a sequel, and people are saying, well, when is it coming out? And you got to tell us, what happens to this in this particular circumstance that I've left hanging there. Okay, you got to finish this. So now it's becoming more of I won't say a job because I still enjoy it, but the pressure's there to kind of complete it. And I'm thinking, okay, it's not as much fun anymore. Mm-hmm. But I just enjoyed writing. So.
Yeah. Is it something that you would encourage other people to do? Because I know that there are a lot of people who are watching this show who probably like to make a stab at writing a book, but for some reason they don't have the confidence, or they don't think they have the time, or they're worried about the shenanigans that the publishing industry can put you through. What kind of advice would you give people who might be interested in writing a book?
Well, I understand the lack of confidence because I had actually none in this at the beginning. I was just doing it for myself and for interest of my family and some friends. And even when the pressure started to build, they said, Mack, you've got to publish this. You've got to do something with it. I kept saying, yeah, okay, but really, I mean, who's going to read it? And so push came to shove one time when a lawyer friend of mine says, I'll read it when you published it. And when I hadn't, she says, give it to me now. And 3 weeks later, she sent me a rather forceful email saying, get off your butt and get this thing going. Mm-hmm. So I had to pull myself out of my shell and started saying, well, okay, now I've got a product here. I guess I should look at publishing it. So I went to a self-publishing process because, as you're probably aware, when you're an unpublished writer, nobody knows you, so nobody's going to jump in and take your book and publish it. So I went the self-publishing route, and I've been amazed at the reaction. I never anticipated people coming up to me and said, Mack, wow, you really did well here. I really enjoyed it. And even some ex-RCMP members, one of them says he's my biggest fan now because he read the book and he thoroughly enjoyed it. So. Mm-hmm.
And so, what is this? Tell us a little bit about the storyline of the book, when it's set, and how long it goes on for, and really what the ties maybe to Grand Manan are, mm-hmm. and what about the history of Grand Manan did you uncover that people would maybe not be so aware of?
Well, I set the book in 1960 because I thought it would be an interesting era. It was just prior to my time, but I was familiar enough with it by talking to other members who were there and with people who lived there. And for example, back in those days, the telephone system operated out of somebody's kitchen, and even the RCMP were on a party line. There was only one private line on the island, and that was at the federal building. So when you're doing police work, it's an added, feature you have to deal with. The story is about a young constable who was on the island with a corporal, and by circumstance, the corporal is pulled away for 6 weeks, and he's left alone with strict instructions that if anything serious happens, you will call headquarters and they'll send somebody down to help. Well, my young constable's got 5 years' experience. He's just got enough knowledge to get himself into trouble. And he does. When a body is found off the wharf, and it turns out to be a foreign national, obviously murdered with a broken neck, he decides he wants to start the investigation on his own. He's conscious of the islanders and how what's going to happen if they bring a team of investigators in from Fredericton, and they're going to tear the island apart. Everybody's a suspect. He says, just leave it in my hands for now, and I'm going to sort of work through. Well, he gets in over his head, and he's got a lot of pressure on him, and he realizes how he has to finish up or else. So. But there's a body that's found off the wharf, and the main suspect is initially the big guru of the island. He owns the local sardine plant, which is fictitious, and he's the big employer of the island, and he is, suddenly the main suspect in this murder. So what's he going to do? He has to go through the process of the investigation, and.
So this, just so everyone knows, this is a complete fabrication. There's no basis in historic events that have actually taken place, so that there's nobody that can be tied to.
Correct.
This is
This is purely fictional, but it's a lot of the events that you will read in the story actually occurred, but elsewhere.
Right.
The way the body's found, and there's a break into a store, and they're not very unique. There's a twist to each and every one of these, because they really happened. And this is how I was able to put it into my fictional story, because they're interesting in themselves. Some of the circumstances surrounding a break into a store. There's a young couple who have marital difficulties, because this man's policing the island. There's more going on than just the murder, right? He has to do all kinds of things. And there's an interesting twist to that. Because that really happened. That was one of the cases I was investigating when I was here in the area. And some of the people were real. My young constable's landlord and landlady were mine from a different place. They're quirky, okay? And so a lot of interesting people and a lot of interesting events are put in the story that were real, to me, but fictional in a sense of the story.
So your career as an RCMP officer was really integral in the writing of this book, because the different situations actually occurred, and you just decided to take all these things and throw them together into one soup.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it made it fun to write, and it made it a little easier because I didn't have to make things up. They were actually true, so I put them in as the circumstances warranted. Yeah.
So I think that you get to a certain point in your professional life, or in life in general, and you suddenly realize that you've got these interesting stories in your head. And did you find the process of actually writing them down to be pleasurable, frustrating? How did that play out for you?
Well, because they were real life events, they weren't frustrating. They were actually interesting. I had a lot of fun doing it, and everybody has, as they always say, everybody has a story to write, and it's based on your own experiences, and so it's kind of fun to write them down, and that's what really got me into writing, was just the idea of writing these things out and perhaps leaving them behind for future generations to look at and say, oh, this is what great-great-granddad did or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I encourage people to do that. But I would also say, don't sit down and write a story with the idea that I'm going to write the great Canadian novel, because that doesn't always happen. I'm amazed that this has been as popular as it is. But if it hadn't been, I'd just been just as happy. If it just sat on my shelf with a few printed versions up there for my kids to read, I'd have been just as pleased. It was something I created.
So it's really it's really a labor of love for yourself is really the impetus for the
absolutely
to the thing. So. For people who might contemplate writing a book, once you got the boot from your the lady that said get on to it,
yes.
What is the timeline? Was it a fairly quick process, this self-publishing route that you took?
I suppose so, although being my first experience, I don't have much to compare it with. But yes, it was. I think it was in February that I approached Friesen Press, who published it, and I had nowhere to go. I didn't know what to do. Okay, I'm new at this, so I went on to self-publishing on the web, and they popped up under Friesen Press. They said, "Here, we'll send you a whole package on what it's about." Then they followed up with a phone call. And they didn't see it, but they just said, look, you've got a good aspect here. You've got a murder mystery, which is popular. You've got RCMP, which is people to be interested in. You've got Grand Manan, which is another interesting aspect to it, and it's Canadiana. So they said, you've got something here that people may very well be interested in. So I said, well, okay, I'll go ahead with that. So we signed the contract, of course, and when you're self-publishing, you have to pay them to publish it. Mm-hmm. So and we went ahead, took the gamble, but then they sent it off to a different reviewer, and she came back and said, wow, you've really got something here. So suddenly my level of confidence rose considerably, because I didn't know what was going to happen to this when it was actually out there. And she said, no, you've really hit a home run here, and this is out for not just for a first attempt, but it's just a very, very good novel. So I think that was in, February, and in September the book was published.
So that's 2016?
Last year, yes.
Right.
Yeah. And then, being again self-published, it's up to me to sell it. So I ordered some books, and we had a book signing at a local establishment, and things went on from there, all by word of mouth. There's no real advertising involved here, and it's not carried in bookstores. It's only by word of mouth, and I've been really pleased with not just the sales, but the reaction people have had.
With self-publishing, with self-published books like this one, for example, you can purchase it though online through Amazon or
Yes.
that kind of a.
Or any major bookstore. You can go into Kohl's, and they've got their little.
They can order it for
and
you.
Order it through that, and locally, I'm making arrangements with some local establishments to carry it. The Whale Shop has agreed that they're going to have some in stock.
Yes, the Whale Store here in St. Andrews.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Sheila's very good about carrying books of local interest.
Yes.
And it's not often that a story based, in the region, especially right in Charlotte County,
Yes.
comes along.
Yes.
Nonetheless, one that comes with good reviews.
Yes.
So, have you met with some success? Are you happy with how the book has been selling?
Yes, I am. I've had some very good reviews on Amazon. I'm very surprised, and also on my own publisher's website, the reviews have been very good. Amazingly enough, I've sold a lot in Ottawa, mainly because of friends and connections and whatever, and by word of mouth. But people have never heard of Grand Manan. And they look at it and say, "Wow, that was really interesting. What an interesting place that is." And I say, "Well, it's real. It's off the south coast of New Brunswick." Well, never heard of it. So.
How did you come to discover Grand Manan?
Well, when I was stationed in St. George, we used to have the members come over for court every Tuesday, but I was sent there on 2 occasions to relieve the members there, and it wasn't for long. It was a couple of weeks each time, and so I got a flavor of the island, and I got to drive around and know the places, and I thought it's very, very interesting. It's quite a spot.
Well, it's a fascinating island, and as you may know, famous American author Willa Cather summered on Grand Manan back in the 20s and 30s, and wrote some of her best work on Grand Manan. And there have been a number of artists who have painted and sculpted on Grand Manan. It's actually a funny little cultural haven, right sort of in the middle of the ocean, that does draw people. And I think that there's something about the natural beauty of the island. Is that something that lent itself to developing your storyline?
Yes, to a degree it did. Of course, you have the unique aspect of the island, and on one side, on the eastern side, it's all flat, and that's where all of the communities are. And on the other side, you've got large cliffs that makes it uninhabitable. So a part of my story actually takes part back there, so it gave me a unique aspect to my storyline. Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked very well. So yes, the geography even is unique and very interesting. It's a great spot, a great place to be.
Well, it's an amazing island. I don't know, I've traveled a fair bit, and I don't know of any other situations exactly like this. Other than going down into the Caribbean, where there are lots of islands that are near one another. But the island. So the next book that you're writing is that based in Grand Manan also?
It's a sequel.
It's a sequel.
Yes.
And is it another murder?
Oh yes. It'll be another murder. A lot of people have liked the characters. They want me to continue with the character, especially my young constable. They seem to have been attracted to him and his demeanor and his manners. So when they heard I was going to write another sequel, they were very pleased. And so when? Oh, okay, well, hang on. I'm still selling this one, right? So I've started it, and it's I guess it's a process, and it's to come up with a murder. With a storyline that is intriguing and doesn't leave any loose ends. They can be, you get a lot of writer's block. You got to sit back and say, okay, now how's this going to work? How do I do this? And I did that on a couple of occasions in this book too. I felt, where am I going to go from here? And then it developed. It came along.
Yeah. So now that you've got this first book under your belt,
Yeah.
which you self-published.
Yes.
and you've gotten good reviews and so forth. Is there any advantage to seeking a publishing house, a local publishing house, to alleviate you from doing marketing and all of that kind of thing?
I'd love for that to happen. There's a woman back home who heard about my book, and she's a promoter. She contacted me and she says, "Wow, Mac," she says, "we got to talk." So we sat and talked. She says, "You've really got something really, really good here," and she wants to get me out of the CBC and whatever. So yeah, my goal would be to have a regular publisher pick this up and then take over all this promotion and advertising, and let me get along with writing the next story.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there are publishing houses in the Maritimes who are keen to have books of local interest, and so you may well be onto something.
I hope so. Yeah.
You may well be onto something. I think it's great. Who did you get to design the jacket? It's a really I don't know if you can see it without too much reflection, but it's a beautiful jacket. Did you design that yourself?
No, they designed it. I gave them. They said, "What do you want to see on your cover?" And I said, "Well, I like to see some fog, and I like to see some sort of. It is a murder mystery, so I want a little bit of." The darkness, if you will, and there's a bit of the island on there. And they gave me 2 examples, and both were very good. But I settled on this I just asked them to do a couple of little adjustments to it. But yeah, people have remarked on it, and they said it was very, very good. And but they designed it for me.
Is there? I know that there's some interesting architecture on Grand Manan. Not a lot of it, but there is some. Are you using that to sort of house any of the story, or is this mostly outdoor, sort of water-based?
It's outdoors. There's the murder occurs at a local hotel, one of the motels there. So I've got that in the story, and but mostly it's outside or in someone's house, and there's the lighthouse at the end of the island, it's a key geographical spot for an event in the book. So I've incorporated that in there, and of course the wharfs and what have you. Yeah.
Grand Manan is an interesting island in that because of its geographical location, it's a flyway for birds.
Yes.
And as a result, there are a lot of birders,
yes,
or amateur ornithologists, and probably professional ones as well, that visit the island sort of twice a year,
yes,
basically, mostly in the fall, but oftentimes in the spring too.
Right.
And there also are, it's a great place for a lot of the seniors groups, that travel around, whether it's there's a group called the what is it? Well, they're culturally based, and they go around and they study, different culture and literature and art and so forth in the different places. And I'm just wondering, I would think that groups like that would be fascinated to find out about this book, because it would give them some, it's always interesting when you go to an island or a place where a story has been written, and you try and figure out where the story actually took place, even though it didn't actually take place there. It's just sort of a fun mental exercise.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. There are a few actual locations. There's a house there where a character lives, and that house exists, and I describe where it is. So I'm. Some people may want to go drive by and say, "Oh, there's that house there."
I know what group it is now. It's called the Rhodes Scholars.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I remember thinking, "Oh, these are all such smart people."
Yeah.
Well, they're just seniors who are on the road learning.
Oh, I see.
It's a kind of a cool thing.
Yeah.
And I think that it would be, it'd be kind of interesting, because there are a lot of people in that age group who have a story inside of them.
Oh, yes.
Who might, when they're traveling this fall, for example, they might think, "Oh, this might be the time to get this story down on paper."
Yeah.
So it is. So it was a great exercise, and one that you're willing to repeat. And what about your lovely wife now? Is she interested in writing a novel too?
She says she's not, but I think she has one in her as well. If she could sit down and write.
She's probably got quite enough to keep you straight. But
Oh, yes.
well, I think it's fascinating. Is there anything that you'd like to share with the readers, just sort of about your experience writing this book that you'd kind of like to leave people with, so that they might just get that blank piece of paper out and that pen?
Well, the only advice I would give is write for fun, write to enjoy it. And to be honest with you, when I got to the point where it wasn't fun anymore, I just left it until I got the urge to go back to it. I remember watching a program. There was a panel of authors speaking to prospective writers, and they were answering questions about the process. And one writer says, you know, if you're going to write, then take it seriously, and that's what you do. You're a writer. So you sit at your computer and you hammer out a chapter a day, and if you get in writer's block, you sit there and you work through it, and you don't just go off to the bar. Well, I thought, no thanks. You know, when I got writer's block, I went off to the bar. Okay, that was my great processes were still going there as I'm sitting there watching the hockey game and having a beer, because then it's work. You know, and I'm not doing this for work, it's not a labor of love. I just do it when I enjoy writing, and when it's like anything, when you get tired of something, you set it aside and then let it sit for a bit and then go back to it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's great. Well, I wish you every success, and I thank you very much for coming. So, for all of you, The Only Way Out, a murder mystery set on Grand Manan Island. It is sure to be a start-to-finish, can't-put-it-down type book, and I hope you'll all read it. It is I call him Mack, but it's R.K. MacDonald, and it came out in 2016. And thank you, Mack, for coming on and talking about your book and the whole experience around it. And when you write your next one, we'll have you back and we can talk about that.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
Anyway, that's wonderful. So thank you. And thank you all for watching today. And we look forward to seeing you again on another episode of Fundy Tidings.